Hey, we have made it to part 1 of the season 2 finale of Doctor Who, but was it any good? The official synopsis for this episode goes, traps are sprung and old enemies unite as the Doctor and Belinda finally arrive home to find a very different world. Can the Doctor see the truth before midnight arrives? I've got some good things to say about this episode and definitely some bad things to say about this episode, so let's start with the good. Look, I am a sucker for a parallel world, a pretend world, a dream world, and this episode definitely had that. Throughout the season, we've seen Belinda and the Doctor become really close friends, but then in this episode, we see them as a married couple, which just feels so off. There is something so jarring about that, and it's really nice to see Ncuti and Verita really showcase their acting talent by having to pretend to be this, mundane, everyday, happy couple when they're not. So I thought that was good and really strange and a really fun way to set up this episode. Conrad from Lucky Day is back and he's doing all these broadcasts on the TV. He seems to be one of the only things that's on TV, really. And he is constantly doing this live stream, kind of doing all this propaganda about Doctor Who. But the Wish World is from his imagination. So basically the Rani have captured him and have been like, hey, your task is to make this imaginary world. And it was very much like Series 10 Lie of the Land-esque, this episode, where, the Doctor is the one doing these broadcasts to the people with all this propaganda, and the monks have kind of rewritten history so that every human achievement the monks have kind of taken credit for, and, there's like the thought police. There were police in this episode, like actual police, and you could have the police called on you if your husband's having doubts. Call this number. But the difference between Lie of the Land and Wish World is that the Doctor, for the most part, for a lot of the episode, is still kind of under the spell of this Wish World. In Lie of the Land, it's pretty clear that he's like playing along with the monks, like going along with their game. In this, the Doctor really does believe that he's married to Belinda and has a daughter named Poppy, and then things start to crumble from there. So I like it when the Doctor is vulnerable or an evil plan, is working and the Doctor's a part of that. And I truly think there's something like underlying and really dark about how in Conrad's Wish World, in his ideal world, that, mums and dads, they love each other and they love their kid. Because in Lucky Day, it's heavily implied that his upbringing was really rough. His mum used to hit him. And the subtext there is that he came from quite a broken home. So I think it's interesting that in his made up world, he's like, no, mums and dads should love each other and they should love their kid because he never got that. But hey, that was just a random thought and some of the insight you can expect from this channel. So if you want to subscribe, that would be fantastic. It's free and it just takes a moment, and we make videos on Doctor Who all the time, so please consider subscribing. Thank you. One of my favorite things whenever Doctor Who does like a parallel world or a dreamscape, a dream world thing, is the tells that, oh, this isn't real. Like in Last Christmas when they're doing the book check, where words on the same page in the same book don't match. You're like, oh, that's a dream. But for this world, the tell that, oh, this isn't a real place was the mugs on the table. They just fall through whenever you have a doubt about this reality. I thought that was a really fun concept. I love the shot in Belle and John Smith's kitchen where they open it up and one cupboard is just full of mugs. So this is obviously a regular occurrence that happens. Everyone's got these orange bins out the front and in them is just the remnants of all these coffee cups. So obviously in this world, a lot of people just have their doubts. Now let's talk Space Babies. If you've been following this channel for a while, Space Babies to this day is probably my least favorite Ncuti Gatwa episode and one of my least favorite Doctor Who episodes in general. So I was worried about what they were going to do with Poppy, but I must say, this is Poppy's best performance to date. I'm truly intrigued to see what happens with Poppy because this could go one of two ways. It seems like she's going to be a big part of the next episode, the final episode of the finale. So I'm a bit worried about that. But for this episode, Poppy, you were fine. You did great. My main criticism with Space Babies was how jarring their mouths moving looked. It was strange. But it seems like they didn't do that this episode apart from the baby at the start that went ha 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 ha. More on that baby later. Ruby Sunday is back this episode. She was excellent in Lucky Day, and so I was excited to see Ruby Sunday again. Her first scene with the Doctor, or John Smith, I should say, was really interesting, where she's like, hey, are you the Doctor? And the Doctor's like, why are you calling me that? I love that kind of stuff, especially when we're in a dreamscape and someone's like, I think this is all fake. It's only briefly mentioned, but I think the reason that Ruby knows this is fake is because she has also lived through the events of 2025 in the episode 73 Yards, and that was like a fake world. That was like an alternate timeline thing. Doctor Who's a weird show. But because of that, she kind of sees the bigger picture and knows that, oh, something's up with this place. But Ruby goes and finds Shirley again. It's really nice seeing Shirley back in Doctor Who. But also, one of the more dark themes about this episode is the fact that Conrad, who is not a very nice man, he's the one that conjured up this world, and people with disabilities really don't fit into that world. And so Shirley has this kind of safe haven with people that Conrad doesn't view as important, and it's very sad. It's really quite emotional. And also, fun fact, my boy and fellow YouTuber Tharies was in this scene. He's in this episode. Tharies, you're an absolute legend. Shout out to you. But that's truly some of Russell's like darkest writing. But because Conrad doesn't really view them in his ideal world, which is all types of messed up, they too kind of go, oh no, something is up with this world. Something's not quite right. And let's talk about it. The Rani. I recently watched my first ever Rani episode before going into Wish World for a video that you'll see in a couple months' time. And I've got to say, Archie as the Rani absolutely crushed it. I really enjoyed this performance. Strong performance. She's won an Emmy, but there was a massive revelation at the end of this episode, and it sounds like next week they're really going to try and cram a lot into next week. So I hope that Archie, well, the Rani, isn't kind of swept to one side, because I really want to spend more time with this Rani. What else did I like this episode? The set design is probably the best set design I've seen of all of season 2. Like the Bone Palace, hello. Entire set looked magnificent. It was huge and so detailed. And it had a disco ball in the middle. I mean, there's not much to hate. I also really liked how they turned the unit set into this office jobs 1920s looking thing. I love it when you see a familiar setting kind of turned on its head. And so, of course, the Doctor is working at unit, or it's like an insurance thing, even though it did give me massive WandaVision vibes. Actually, this whole episode kind of gave me WandaVision vibes, because it's a dream world and there's like, you know, there's a happy couple and a kid. Yeah, this is basically WandaVision, isn't it? But I will say, if Wishworld's job was to get me excited for next week, it has. But the episode is not without its flaws. Let's talk about the bad. The Rani's motivation in this is absolutely wild. Like, how did Russell come up with this? The villain's plan is to steal a god that is an infant, and it's the god of wishes, and get this baby to somehow grant Conrad his wish of making this imaginary ideal world. And Conrad thinks that's it. Conrad's like, wow, this is such a fun plan. I get to make my ideal world. But the Rani is counting on people within that imaginary world to doubt the world around them, to doubt everything, to question everything, because the more people doubt, the more the world will crumble. And she wants the world to crumble, because if the world crumbles, then we get to see the underverse, the under-universe, whatever the heck that's about. Because in the underverse is Omega. That is mental and quite hard to follow and absolutely bombastic. I appreciate Russell taking big swings, but I think that might have been like that's such a convoluted plot. But if that's the only way to get to the underverse, sure. But I truly think that this episode is a very hard watch for a casual viewer, because you've got the returning Rani, we've got a mention of Omega, we've got Susan returning, we've got Rogue returning, we've got a space baby returning. And I understand it's a finale, I get it, but this, it truly feels like, you know, this is a finale for a 4th series, after we've teased the underworld, after we've teased the return of Omega. As soon as they mentioned Omega, I was like, wow, okay, we're really doing everything next week, aren't we? So I hope it pays off. I truly hope it pays off. And I just mentioned Rogue, whilst it was very nice to see Jonathan Groff back on our screen, even though it looks like he filmed it in his bedroom. He basically sent a message that was, tables don't do that. I think that was what he said. I've only seen the episode the once, but he said, tables don't do that. And then in the next scene, the Doctor's got all the coffee mugs on the table, and whenever he doubts something, one of them slips through. Which is cool, which is great. But I think that Rogue cameo would have been so much more satisfying if, say, it was in Lux or the Robot Revolution or something like that. If there was like a mysterious message, like a screen popped up and he just said, tables don't do that. And we had an entire season leading up until this point where we're like, oh, that's what Rogue meant, instead of it being like, oh, tables don't do that. And then in the next scene, that entire thing is resolved. Because truthfully, I think the Doctor probably could have got there without Rogue's help. Maybe, I don't know. Another one of my major gripes, I mentioned it last week, and my fears have come true, is that Mrs. Flood is absolutely swept to the side. I really, really like Anita Dobson as an actress. I think she is a powerhouse. I think she is absolute great. And in this episode, she just makes a sandwich, and she is absolutely subservient to the Rani. So whilst I didn't enjoy that this episode, there is a chance that next episode they really could do something interesting with this bi-generated Rani. Because we got to see when the Doctor bi-generated, he kind of got along with his former self. But in this one, they seem to have this banter that they don't necessarily enjoy each other's company. They kind of just get along with each other. And so I'm truly hoping that Mrs. Flood is like, no, I am the Rani. I am a big bad, and you're not my boss. I'm equally as much Rani as you. And there is some kind of confrontation. Maybe Mrs. Flood helps the Doctor get rid of this Rani or something. I don't know. Very much Return of the Jedi vibes, you know, throwing the Emperor down that tunnel. I haven't seen Return of the Jedi for a long time. I really don't want Mrs. Flood stuck making sandwiches next week, okay? Moving on, one of the more frustrating plot points of this episode was how good Ruby and Shirley were up until the last act of this episode, because Shirley's like, oh, here's an iPad. It's an old Earth relic. Oh. And then they, for the last 20 minutes of this episode, just watch this iPad and they don't try and infiltrate the tower somehow. They just kind of like, oh, that's bad, isn't it? I really thought that Ruby and Shirley were going to somehow infiltrate the tower or do something. Because the last 20 minutes, they're just like, yeah, that's not good, is it? And then the world ends. So are they dead? Are they going to be in next week? Because if they're not, it's just a waste of time, isn't it? They were so close. And one more thing, the final line of this episode is the Doctor saying, oh no, Poppy is real. Poppy is my daughter. So I'm inclined to believe that Poppy is a Time Lord and that Poppy might end up being Susan's mum somehow, which is absolutely just insane. But then it makes me question, who's the mum of Poppy? Because there is a throwaway line, or it might not be so throwaway line, from the Rani being like, oh yeah, we used to be lovers maybe. So what's all that about? Is Rani Susan's grandmother? I don't know. I don't know how Time Lords work. But anyway, Wishworld is an incredibly strange episode that plays with a lot of dream tropes while still being original. Although I have a few major gripes this episode, it could fix everything by next week. So for now, I will give Wishworld a 7 out of 10. But hey, that's just me. Please let me know what you thought of Wishworld in the comments below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you find it confusing? Did you find it boring? Are you excited for next week? Please let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want a more in-depth analysis of this episode, I have a podcast called Who's There? A Doctor Who podcast. And this week, we are getting none other than one of the episode's stars, Tharies, to join us on the podcast. So if you want the behind-the-scenes gossip of the episode, please tune in for that. It should be an absolute hoot. Okay, so I'm going to go and clean up all of these broken mugs. Like and subscribe. Bye. Oh my gosh, there's so many mugs.